Today I'm going to be reading an extract from the lovely Heidi Ashworth's latest novel, Miss Armistead Makes Her Choice. This is a brilliant book, I've already read it. The extract I'm going to be reading is a scene where the hero, Mr. Colin Lloyd-Jones, and his sister Annalisa are taking the heroine, Miss Elizabeth Armistead, and their friend, Miss Catherine, on a picnic. I find that I tire of sitting. Miss Elizabeth, would you be kind enough to accompany me for a long walk along the river? 3 sets of eyes looked up at him in some consternation, but Miss Elizabeth rose to her feet and took his arm without the slightest sign of trepidation. Miss Catherine made an attempt to rise as well, but Annalisa, very sensibly, placed the entire blancmange in Miss Catherine's lap, effectively pinning her to the ground. He made another note to procure a fitting gift for his most excellent sister, a resolve he forgot entirely the moment he turned his back. Determined that they should walk to where they should not be overheard, Colin at first refrained from speaking. He headed for the edge of the river with its masses of greenery and promised privacy. He would not end the day without opening his budget on the state of his heart. Whether or not Miss Elizabeth wished to hear what he had to say was a question he longed to be answered. So it was that she was the first to break the silence. Mr. Lloyd-Jones, I must thank you for this outing. What a pleasure it has been. India is either too hot or too rainy to venture out of doors more than rarely. But here, she spread her free arm and looked into the sky. It is such a beautiful, mild, sunny day, and I find myself quite content. Colin caught sight of only her dimpled chin and red mouth from under her bonnet, but he was persuaded he had never before seen a more fascinating dimple or a more enticing red. Before he said what he most fervently wished to say, he must arrange matters so that he would be allowed to gaze into her face of an entirety. There was much to learn from her countenance, and he would know it all. The fear that she would not like his words, and that it might be the last time he would be allowed to gaze upon that face, was one he barely allowed himself to feel. I have heard it said that it rains in Scotland every single day. He knew it was a mistake before the words were out, but he could not seem to refrain from adding upon it. And that is summer only. The other seasons of the year offer far worse. She turned to look at him, but the shadow made by her infernal bonnet rendered her eyes impossible to read. Mr. Lloyd-Jones, if I did not know you better, I should think you felt it your duty to make apparent the errors in my thinking. What errors would those be? He asked with a bald-faced innocence that rang false in his own ears. She looked down, and he was robbed of all but the sight of her chin. Mr. Lloyd-Jones, I had believed myself safe in your company, that you comprehended my circumstances, that your honour would not allow you to place me in a position that should compromise my character. He thought perhaps her voice shook with tears, and he wished to tell her how very remorseful he was. He wished to speak words of approbation for the very character of which she spoke. More than anything, he wished to pull her behind the nearest privet and rid her face of that abhorrent bonnet. To his wonder, she did not object, and they stood gazing raptly into one another's eyes, the bonnet wedged between them. Miss Elizabeth, he breathed, I cannot ask you to do or say anything that should force you to compromise your integrity. It is that very integrity at which I stand in considerable awe. I should be a fool to mar what is one of your most admirable qualities. And yet I cannot let this opportunity pass without telling you it is far from the only quality in which I most ardently delight. Mr. Jones, I must beg you to stop. Why? He asked, as he tossed that hat to the ground and took her hand in his. Are my intentions so unwelcome? No, she said so quickly that he felt he had reason to hope. That is to say, There is nothing in your manner or your character that I find in the least unwelcome. If I were but free, she said, shaking her head, her eyes wet with tears. But it is of no use. I have made my choice, and I must abide by it. Then it is not that you cannot love me? He asked, his feelings a painful mixture of hope and resignation. It is not a matter of my capacity to love you, nor is it an event to look for in future, she said, gathering his hand to her face. It is because I cannot stop that I am torn in two. It was then that he knew the full tragedy of his position. What sort of madness is this? He begged, as he attempted to consign every aspect of her beloved face to memory. What madness that I would not wish changed about you, the very quality that frustrates my desires. I wish to add to my own your strength, your resolve, your determination to abide by what is right and true. And yet, in so doing, I should destroy your very essence. Is there no way to make you mine without making you somehow less? To his astonishment, she fell against his chest and began to weep. He put his arms around her and held her tight, far tighter than he ought, and wondered at how perfectly natural it felt to hold her, her cheek against his coat, his own against her hair. He closed his eyes and prayed that she would not soon be shed of all her tears. He prayed that when she proved to be, he should know what it was he ought to say. Lastly, he prayed that she would raise her head to look at him in such a way that he would find it impossible to resist the intense yearning to cover her mouth with his own. It seemed an eternity, yet sooner than he had hoped, when she lifted her face to his, a glossy ringlet pressed to her face like a flower between the pages of a book, and her jewel-like eyes sparkling with tears. "How could you make me less?" she murmured. "I have travelled all this way from India, only to find it is you who makes me whole." There we go. Well, what can I say about this book? As I said, I've already read it, and I'll post the link to my review on this post. And it is a really good book. The story is very heartbreaking at times, especially for those of you who like your angst. This is the book for you. And I really enjoyed reading it. For those of you who have already come across some of Heidi's stories, the Miss Delacourt series, Miss Delacourt Speaks Her Mind, Miss Delacourt Has Her Day, etc. It has a very clever crossover for you. You get to check in on Anthony, the hero of Miss Delacourt Speaks Her Mind. And it's quite fun for others who have read the rest in the series to see the crossover. But that's not to say that you have to have read the others to enjoy this one. In fact, you could start with this one. It doesn't really matter. This is easily a standalone book, and a brilliant one at that. I hope that you have enjoyed the extract, and I hope now that you will go and buy this book, because it is a brilliant read.